Okay, so last time we talked about what your phone can tell you, and help you make deductions through utilizing the repository of information that sits comfortably in your pocket every day. Today, we're going to be talking about what another person's phone can tell you about them. Imagine for a moment if we were able to take the classical Sherlock Holmes, with all his experience fighting crime in 19th century London, and brought him into the 21st century and showed him a modern-day smartphone, and told him that this is a device that almost everyone has, that they take with them everywhere they go, and that they use to keep in contact with the people they know, and they also store personal information on these devices. They even have cases on these devices that reflect their interests and personalities. Well, I would venture a guess that he would grow giddy with excitement at the deductive possibilities. In the BBC Sherlock, we caught a glimpse of what a modern-day Sherlock Holmes would make of a smartphone in the very first episode. But I know that there is much more that can be concluded consistently than what the writers showed in that episode. Now, I have researched and heard about various different techniques and things to look for in regards to phones and the deductions that can be made from them, particularly from Ben Cardall's book, The Monographs, and his podcast known as the Deductionist podcast. If you haven't checked either of these out, I highly recommend that you do. However, for today's episode, I wanted to bring someone on who has experience in dealing with the damage that phones can sustain and is perceptive enough to notice the connections between the person and the damage on the phone. Well, I think I found just the right person. He's a longtime viewer and a big supporter of the art of deduction. He's also himself a YouTuber who makes tech videos, particularly on phone repair. While I don't often break phones, I do enjoy watching his videos for the fact that they are fun and entertaining, so if you're interested in tech videos that aren't dull and dry, you'll definitely like his channel. That being said, join me in welcoming Benji D from Get Fixed to the art of deduction.
Back in high school, I realized just how oblivious I was to the world around me. Because of this, I became very intrigued with psychology, specifically the ability to read people's body language and determine whether or not a person is lying to me through telltale signs such as microfacial expressions that would usually go unnoticed. The Art of Deduction is a channel I stumbled upon 2 years ago. I became extremely hooked after watching a very well put together channel take the ability to analyze people and the world around us to the next level. There's a Patreon link down below. It would mean the world to me if you'd help support his channel's growth. $5, $10, or even $1, it doesn't matter. I believe in contributing to a greater cause bigger than yourself. Can you determine a person's character through a quick analyzation of their phones? The answer is yes.
Wow, 2.5 years? That's a long time. What kind of videos did I even make 2.5 years ago? Here, let me see. Oh, right. Well, you are a loyal aspiring detective there, Benji D. Thanks for sticking around. So anyway, diving into the techniques that I know of, there are the obvious things and the less obvious things. Ultimately, for these techniques to be of much value to you, you need to have the actual phone in your hand. So whether you borrow someone's phone to send a text, or steal it from their office after being hired on a covert case, or, more than likely, you'll probably be given it by a willing participant. It'll be more like a party trick for you to show off with friends, I mean, assuming you have friends, By whatever means you acquire this phone, let's just assume that you have it. So let's start with the obvious, the part of the phone that people purposely choose to reflect their personality, their phone case. Now, some cases are rather bland, just a solid color with no images or artwork. We'll get onto that in a moment. But first, let's take, for example, my phone case. It's thin and flimsy, not going to offer much protection, so it's for aesthetic purposes. Looking at the case, we can see that it is made to look like the door to 221B Baker Street, so we can see a strong affinity for Sherlock Holmes right there. For more bland cases, this indicates a preference to function rather than form. It could also be because the selection of cases was limited, or that the case that they got was more cost efficient for them. Now, we won't go into the details of color theory now, but just as a general rule, warm colors like red, yellow, and orange indicate a more open personality, and cool and neutral colors reflect a more closed, or at least calm and collected personality. Bear in mind that this is not 100% across the board at all, and we'll go into the fundamentals and nuances of color theory another time. After examining the case itself and determining its functionality or lack thereof, and determining the implications of the artwork that's on it, we can now take a closer look at the wear and tear on the case. Here we have scuff marks. They are not uniform, so for multiple occasions then, but only a few are deep, caused by forceful abrasions like being kept in a pocket with a key or dropped on a rough surface, but the lighter and more plentiful scuffs are only visible in certain lighting. These are the result of sliding the phone on the surface with small bits of debris like sand. Bear in mind that all of this can be translated to the body of the phone if there is no case. Expense of the phone bleeds over into this category. If the newest Galaxy Note has been treated rather poorly with no case and a scuffed up body, you can reasonably infer either total recklessness or a high level of income, as a person who doesn't see the need to properly protect their phone or treat it well likely doesn't view it as an expensive item, rather one that is easily replaceable. Conversely, if you see the person, and based on the expense and age of their clothing, you estimate their level of income to be more modest, but they have an expensive phone, it is likely to be what is known as a luxury item. We'll go into this concept in more depth in a future video, but because the value of the phone is high relative to their income, they are more likely to treat it with care. Severe damages in this case might be as the result of a previous owner who could afford to gift it to them. As always, observe in context. These are only a few examples to get you thinking, and we will go into the concept of income and luxury items in future videos.
I never used a case in my life simply because of aesthetics. Personally, I don't see any reason to do so if my main reason for buying the phone is because of how it looks. Late 2016 is when I broke my first phone screen. After that first incident, it's been downhill from there. Every phone I got afterwards broke from a vicious fall. Let's talk about some of the best case options on the market today. One of the most reliable protective brands to date is the OtterBox. It's been around for quite some time now and it's still at the top of this list. I've witnessed countless numbers of people confidently demonstrate just how protective this brand really is. I've seen people drive trucks over their phones, launch their phones off of 2-story buildings, and it still survives. The OtterBox is no longer an expensive option. It now sits at an in-between price of $21. When first buying a case, the average consumer usually goes for something cheap and flimsy, not realizing that not all cases are designed to protect phones from a bad fall. Some cases are made specifically to protect your device from scratches, while other cheap options are designed to look good. Failure to acknowledge this will result in a broken screen that costs almost 3 times the cost of the semi-inexpensive case. If you want to keep people like myself out of business, then I recommend buying better cases. I'll link some of the best case options down below.
Briefly, let's talk about the phone's screen. Now, barring the obvious things like cracks, which indicate the dropping of the phone, the oils from your fingers left on the screen can give some insight. For instance, you can potentially determine what the passcode is on the phone by the fingerprints left over the corresponding numbers. Now, the first number will have the most oil left and thus the largest mark, as the finger loses oil with each button pressed. However, if a number is used twice in a code, then it will also have a larger print left on it. From there, you plug in the possible combinations, and after a few tries, you should have it. With the dragging line passcode, it is much easier because it's either one way or the other. Once you've gotten into the phone, you can use this same principle to determine which apps they use the most, and thus what their interests are. Now, this doesn't always work. As you can see on my phone, the prints can become hard to determine after a lot of use, so it isn't a super simple endeavor, and not always possible, especially if they've cleaned their screen before giving you the phone, as there will be no fingerprints left on it.
I don't know about you guys, but if my cousin unlocks her phone, it'll look like she was playing a game of Candy Crush in a couple of seconds. Figuring out a person's code with this method is possible if they immediately set the device down afterwards without using it, or else all you're gonna see is smudges all over the screen. A broken screen usually shows a great deal of carelessness. I know this because I'm pretty careless when it comes to my phone in terms of adding additional protection. If spending $45 to $100 on a broken screen isn't a big deal to you, I'll know. If I was one of those sketchy phone repair guys, I'll charge you solely based on how much I think you're willing to pay me.
Lastly, let's talk buttons. Now, most smartphones have very few buttons, but the volume buttons remain a feature pretty much throughout. Now, the stiffer the volume buttons, the less regularly they're used, as they haven't been broken into. Now, for volume buttons that have been broken into, there's a theory that holds up pretty well. In general, a person who casually changes the volume on their phone will have rather stiff buttons. Mine, for instance, are rather stiff as I rarely change the volume on my phone, and when I do, it's usually in very small increments. Now, for someone who changes the volume often, for instance, someone who hides the fact that they are watching videos on their phone or listening to music, they will probably have loose volume buttons. So maybe a kid who watches videos at school and changes the volume depending on the likelihood of getting caught, or a person at work goofing off on their phone instead of working, you know what I mean. This is a deduction that Ben Cardall regularly employs with high success. guess, from what he has said at least. But I personally don't have experience in determining this in particular, so I'm rather curious. Of course, I'll try and implement this as much as possible whenever I can, but I'd like to know what your findings are, so let me know in the comments down below after you've tried this, and let me know if it holds true.
That's actually pretty interesting. I've never really analyzed why buttons get stiffened over time from that perspective, but I do however understand why they get jammed. Jammed buttons says a lot about the owner. When frustrated, instead of trying to figure out a logical way to repair, they resort to bashing their phones across any tabletop they come across. That shows me just how impatient this person is with time-consuming processes. So if it takes me any longer than an hour to repair their phones, they will be angry, even if that anger doesn't show externally. From my experiences working with phones, Jordan's analysis holds true. The iPhone 4 is a prime example of that. For some reason, the iPhone 4's power button getting stuck became pretty commonplace and expected. I have not yet seen a stuck or stiffened volume button on any of the latest iPhones, however, and I use the volume button all the time when I'm at the gym, so... Anyways, we're gonna leave this discussion to you guys. What do you think's causing the buttons to get stuck or broken? Let us know your thoughts down in the comments below. Also, don't forget to support Jordan. I'll have his Patreon linked down in the video description. Thank you, Jordan, for letting an idiot on your platform. That's actually a big mistake.
Thanks again, BenjiD, for joining me on this video. Your insight that you provided was very informative, and I hope all you aspiring detectives out there benefit from it just as much as I did. With that being said, if you're not already convinced, I would highly recommend that you check out his channel and subscribe. So, thank you all so much for watching. Be sure to give this video a like if you learned something from it, and if you're new to this channel and you liked what you saw, be sure to subscribe here as well. Thanks again to my Patreon on Patreon for helping make this content a reality. With that, all you aspiring detectives out there, arrivederci.